if you do the math, that works out to 1.7 books a year, but who's counting? This is an informal Q&A before the actual event starts. So if you have any cues, you have to make sure I'm able to hear them, otherwise my A will be bizarre. So if you do have a question, please ask away. And if I'm going to address it in the talk, I will simply decline to answer. Questions? No questions? This is a bad sign.
Where do you get your ideas?
Where do I get my ideas?
Okay, better yet, where'd you
No,
get
no. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you an example of an idea. And then you'll have to figure it out from there. In the early 60s in Bisbee, Arizona, my sister and her husband had this little ranch down on the border, south of Bisbee. And on this ranch, they had a horse named Warpaint. They had a cow named Shirley. They had a pig named Boris. And a three-legged Australian shepherd named Smokey Joe. Warpaint was very smart. And he knew that the moment it rained, the electric fence would go down and he'd let everybody out. So my sister came home from work one day and everybody was out. Smokey Joe helped her round up Shirley and the pig, but Warpaint was out in the pasture. If Warpaint was in the pasture, you could walk up to him just fine if you had nothing in your hand resembling a rope or a bridle. If you had a rope or a bridle, he stayed just out of reach. One day that happened. My sister got Shirley and Boris put away, and then she went after Warpaint. She walked across the pasture with nothing in her hands. She walked right up to him and she was sort of snuggling him under his chin. And while she was doing that, she reached up under her blouse, pulled off her bra, wrapped it around his neck, and led him home. Poor Warpaint, he could never trust anybody after that. So years later, I'm writing Joanna Brady #5. This is 40 years later. I'm writing Joanna Brady #5, and Joanna is pinned down by gunfire in the Palancios, southeast of Douglas. She needs a diversion. What does she do? She whips off her bra and she uses it as a slingshot. Now, I cannot explain to you how this happened. My husband maintains there's a whirring blender in my head. And things go into my head one way and then they come out another way. I know my sister's bridal bra is related to Joanna Brady's slingshot bra, but that's the best I can tell you. You know, ideas come and I just use them.
Do you write about the dog?
Do I write about the dog? Yes, I'm pretty sure everybody who's coming is here, so I'll tell you about Bella, the book tour dog. Bella was found abandoned on the street 4.5 years ago on a rainy, cold October morning in Bellevue, Washington. I was coming back from shopping with my daughter and grandson. We had been to Target. And coming down a busy two-way street in Bellevue, here is this little brown dog running desperately in the opposite lane, trying to catch up with whoever just put her out. If you've ever seen a dog running after a car like that, you know what it looked like. My daughter immediately pulled over on the shoulder and began flashing her lights, waving her arms, trying to slow down traffic. She claims that the wheels had not yet come to a complete stop when I was out the passenger door and running up the middle of the street too. I traced her for the better part of a mile. When I finally caught her, she was soaking wet, she was terrified, she was muddy, and at that point, she only weighed 7 pounds. She was really starving to death. She's not starving to death now. We tried to find her owner, but she had no chip, she had no tag, and finally, 4 hours later, we had to go home. When we went into the house, my grandson, Cold, who was 5 then, was explaining to Grandpa how we found this poor little fella on the street. And Grandpa said, Cold, fella is a boy's name. This is a girl dog. And Cold said, okay, we'll call her Bella. And Bella she is. We found out immediately, she's a hearing assistance dog now. Believe me, I do need hearing assistance. We found out immediately that she was an apartment dog. She had never met a doggy door and had no idea how to use one. We had 2 completely fenced yards, but she was unable to go outside and do her duty without someone on the other end of a leash. Walking a dog in a totally fenced yard in the wind and rain for no reason was sort of annoying. Eventually we got her to the point where if we just held the leash, it didn't have to be on her. And now she can go by herself, but she always walks up to that doggy door and kind of closes her eyes before she goes through because she's not quite sure what's going to be on the other side. We found her in October. We tried leaving her alone with the fellow who had been our beloved dog sitter for all of our golden retrievers. Bella had evidently been mistreated by a man of some kind, and she wasn't having it. When we left her with Martinez, she would hide under the bed, she wouldn't eat, and she would pee and crap in the house. So in February, when it was time to go on a book tour, come right in. This is an informal question and answer. You are not late. There are plenty of seats in the front row. When it was time for the next book tour following February, we had to take Bella with us. The first stop was in Phoenix at the Ritz-Carlton, and that's where we discovered that Bella had been raised in an apartment building with elevators. Because she understood completely, you walk up to the wall opens, you go through the wall, you turn around, you sit down, you wait, the wall opens, and you get off. In Bella's first day, the first days in Phoenix of any book tour are hell because the people in New York have no idea how big Phoenix is. And they send you trotting back and forth from Sun City to Mesa to Tempe, back. There were 4 events that day, and that day she interacted with 2,400 people. She was very tired when we got home. But at one of the first events, I was signing, Bill and Bella were sitting off to one side, and a lady came up to the table and asked me if I would please sign the book to her daughter. She said, my daughter just lost her battle with breast cancer, but I'd really like the book signed to her. Well, by the time I finished signing the book, we were both crying, and then she went and spent the next 20 minutes with Bella. So she was a therapy dog before she even became a therapy dog. But when I finished writing Moving Target, this is Allie Reynolds number 9. It was the week before the wedding. And putting a wedding in the middle of a book, especially in murder mystery, is sort of daunting. How do you do that? Because the wedding, either the wedding takes over the murder or vice versa, and it's just not a good mix, at least not in my head. So I wrote a novella. In our family, we call it the novella. It's called A Last Goodbye, and it's out in paper form in the back of this book. So if you have the paperback moving target, you'll find A Last Goodbye here. It's also an ebook to the tune of 99 cents, I believe. That's going to break the bank. And it's Be's and Allie's wedding. Bo, he does this all the time. He gets into other people's storylines. B and Allie's wedding in Las Vegas on Christmas Eve, and her grandson finds a little dachshund abandoned in a casino parking lot. Allie Reynolds does not want a miniature dachshund as a wedding present, but guess what? She has one anyway. So that's, the title is A Last Goodbye. And yes, I am quite sure reading the story will make you cry. But I can tell you, I wrote the book, The Dog Does Not Die. Okay, I'm ready to be introduced now.
I know, I don't know, I won't look at it.
I don't know if it's necessary now. This is so such a nice informal Q&A. Well, welcome everyone this afternoon. My name is Johanna Rupp, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today and supporting your local independent bookstore. It's because of each and every one of you that we can have these really incredible experiences where we get to come and discuss books that we love and get them signed and hang out with even the author's dogs. It's really extraordinary. Thank you so much. This afternoon Book Passage is proud to welcome New York Times best-selling author J.A. Jance. Jance is beloved for her Allie Reynolds, J.P. Beaumont, and Joanna Brady series, as well as for her 4 interrelated Walker family suspense novels. This afternoon we will celebrate her latest Allie Reynolds novel, Cold Betrayal, which is being met with much acclaim and much anticipation. So please join me in a warm Book Passage welcome to J.A. Jance.
By the way, Bella loves applause. She thinks that means it's almost over and we get to go home. Bella, you've been very good. Would you like to go find your daddy now? Hang on.
Oh, I'll take her.
Oh, she'll go. She knows where he is. Go find your daddy, Bella.
Find him.
Go find him. Find him.
Daddy.
Go find him. Call her. Call her, William.
Come on, Bella.
She's
Come
staying
on, baby. She
here.
might be stuck.
Oh,
She's stuck.
oh, her leash was stuck under my 20-pound purse.
There's nothing like a rescue.
Bella.
Yeah, she's greeting everybody. She is my goodwill ambassador. Okay, I'm going to do a survey here. She went in the other direction?
She took off.
This is right there.
It's in my car.
First, I want to know if we have any book signing virgins in this room. Is there anyone in this room who has never been to a book signing before? There's always one.
I have a book signed by you, however.
But you've never been to an event.
No, I've never had it done myself.
Okay, so I'll give you some book signing hints. In the past 2 weeks, I have driven, my husband has driven, I have ridden 2,300 miles. I have done 24-hour-long presentations. I have signed countless books. Please do not tell me I look tired. I am tired. But you are not allowed to tell me that I look tired. And if you will notice that I am here talking with no teleprompters. If in the course of the program I forget my place in line and have my train of thought run off the rails, please do not hand me a handwritten note or send me an email recommending an herbal remedy for holding off Alzheimer's. Is that fair?
Yes.
And that has happened to me. I will mention it. Yes, last week. I was in Sun City in Oro Valley near Tucson, and yes, here's what you need to hold off Alzheimer's. Okay, another question. Oh, did you come here thinking this was going to be a literary experience?
Well, I was just wanting to see you because you're my aunt's neighbor up in Bellevue.
Oh.
She lives
Oh.
right next door to you. I've seen the side of your house many times.
Have you seen the side of, did you see the side of my house when it was wrapped in plastic because the faux stucco was leaking?
No,
Who's-
but I've seen it for many, many years, even before you lived there.
Oh, okay,
Beautiful garden,
yes,
pictures from the papers.
okay. All right, but now I'm totally off track. Okay, this is not going to be a literary event. If you came here expecting me to read from my new book, I do not read at readings. I hated group reading from an early age. In primary school, I was always in the Bluebirds. And those were the very best readers. I always felt sorry for the red birds and especially for the yellow birds. But we would all go up to the front of the class. We would sit on tiny chairs in a tiny circle. And each student would read a sentence or two. I read for plot. And so whenever it was my turn to read, I would always be pages ahead, trying to find out what Dick, Jane, Sally, and Spot were up to. So I got bad grades in reading since I never knew the place. You know, the teacher always marked you down if you didn't know where the place was. And I think the idea of coming to a room like this and reading to a room full of people who are perfectly capable of reading on their own is a stupid idea. And so, no, there will not be a reading. And if you expected a glamorous author, good luck with that, too. You know, there's only so much concealer will conceal. And they haven't invented Spanx for this yet. So, this is what you get. And I hope it'll be fun.
It will. That's good so far.
I was born in Watertown, South Dakota. We came from the northeastern corner of South Dakota. My mother was from a little town called Summit, and my father came from Marvin, 10 miles away. In the summer of 1935, my father went to Summit, courting my mother's younger sister. And Grandpa Anderson liked to tell us, I told him, Norman, in this house, we eat the old bread first.
Yeah.
Which is how my father spent the next 68 years of his life with my mother, Eddie, as opposed to my Aunt Toots. By 1949, the folks had a farm at Twin Brooks, a farm with 17 cows that had to be milked morning and night. They had 3 kids. I was the youngest of those. My mother called me the youngest one of the first batch. And in 1949, my father came down with rheumatoid arthritis. He spent 6 months bedridden. He went to see a doctor in Millbank, South Dakota, and the doctor told him, you need to move to a high, dry climate. My dad came back from Millbank and reported what the doctor said to my mother. My mother had only a 7th grade education, but her favorite subject was geography. So she hauled out her old raggedy geography book. She opened it to a map of Arizona. She pointed to Bisbee in the lower right-hand corner of the page and said, that's high and dry, we're moving there. You did not argue with my mother. Or if you did so at your own peril. If you have met Joanna Brady's mother, Eleanor Lathrop Winfield, you have met my mother. My Aunt Alice asked me once, she said, well, doesn't Evie mind the way you portray her in the book? Actually, she didn't. She told me once, I really like that Eleanor Lathrop. So we moved to Bisbee. We moved to the Warren neighborhood of Bisbee. And kids from Warren went to Greenway School. I have no idea how the principal, Mr. Nadolski, sorted those 40 or 50 kids per class into various classrooms. For all I know, he drew names out of the hat. When it came time for second grade, you either had Mrs. Barker or you had Mrs. Spangler. Who did you have, Martha?
Barker. Mrs. Barker.
And for you, I ended up with Mrs. Spangler. And Mrs. Spangler is the reason we're all here today. Because in second grade, in Mrs. Spangler's class, over under the window were shelves that were full of books. And if you finished your work early, which I always did, you could take any of those books back to your desk and read them. And it was among Mrs. Spangler's books that I encountered the books of L. Frank Baum. Not just The Wizard of Oz that we all know with Dorothy and the Ruby Slippers, but all those other Oz books as well. Some kids encountering The Wizard of Oz are fascinated by the magician standing behind the green curtain. Not me. I was fascinated by Frank Baum standing behind the words. And from the moment I realized that a person had put those words on the paper, that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I wanted to be. A couple of decades ago, I was interviewed by a young woman, a reporter for a no longer existing newspaper. And she said, well, how old were you when your first book was published? I said, I was 41 in 1985. And she said, oh, you were so old. I wonder how old she'd think I am now. And I'd be most surprised if she could have kept up with us the last 3 weeks, but be that as it may. One of the advantages of being this age is that some of the unfinished things in your life have the opportunity to come full circle. I finished writing next summer's book late Monday evening, with this book tour starting bright and early Saturday morning.
Wow.
That's a scary deadline. And so I didn't exactly take the rest of the week off. I sent it to New York Monday evening, and then I spent Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday doing interviews. Some of them were print interviews, some of them were for the Tucson Festival of Books, which was coming up, and some of them were for this book. 2 of them were TV interviews that were filmed at our home in Tucson. And one of the cameramen turned out to be Lucy Spangler's grandson. And guess who inherited all of his grandmother's books? That came full circle. I grew up in Bisbee, graduated from Bisbee High School in 1962. I was number 7 in a class of 128 kids. In case you're wondering, that's how come Allie Reynolds' scholarship program always targets the second tier kids. In the class of 62, there were 2 girls who were pregnant. One was Linda Sales Beach. Linda and her boyfriend Claude Beach, who was also in our class, had gotten in trouble our sophomore year. They got married between our sophomore and junior years, and by the end of our senior year, Linda was actually expecting their second child. There was another girl in our class who, for the purposes, she was not married. She had a big burly boyfriend with a big burly Letterman sweater, which concealed a multitude of sins, as it were. And so we kids all knew she was pregnant, but the faculty sort of turned a blind eye. And she will, for the purposes of this conversation, be referred to henceforth as Letterman sweater girl. The 1st of May of that year, the acting superintendent of schools sent a letter to Linda Sales Beach telling her that due to her delicate condition, she would not be allowed to participate in Class 9 baccalaureate or graduation. Claude, the father of her 2 delicate conditions, received no such letter. And our junior and senior year, nobody had seen fit to mention that maybe it was a bad idea for the father of delicate conditions to be out there playing for varsity sports. Letterman sweater girl didn't get a letter either. Pat McAdams, Hall, and I were co-editors of the Copper Chronicle, the school newspaper that year. And we were also sort of troublemakers. And so we began passing a petition that Linda Sales Beach be allowed to graduate with our class. The first thing that happened was Mrs. Briggins, the newspaper advisor, called us in and told us we needed to stop passing the petition. We said, no, this isn't fair. Then Mrs. Medikovich, the senior class sponsor, called us in and said, you need to stop passing the petition. And we said, no, this isn't fair. About a week and a half later, on a Tuesday afternoon after school, I got home and the phone rang. Now, I always like to look at men's faces when I say that, because guys sort of do math in their heads. And they're thinking, okay, she graduated in 1962, this is 2015, and she's sitting up there expecting us to believe that the phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon in 1962. Well, actually, I know it for sure. And here's why. The phone rang and I answered it because my mother was ironing. And my mother washed on Monday, ironed on Tuesday. No exceptions. So the gentleman on the phone asked to speak to my father. I said he wasn't home. He asked to speak to my mother. And she said, all right, I'll have Norman call you when he gets home. My dad came home and my mother said, you need to call the acting superintendent of schools. So my dad did. When he got off the phone, he turned to me and he said, Judy, I have just been informed that you've been chosen to receive the Bisbee High School Alumni Scholarship to the University of Arizona. You will receive the scholarship on class night, providing you stop passing the petition. I was one of 7 kids. There was very little money to spare in our family. That scholarship was the only way I could go on to school. And if I hadn't gone on to school, I wouldn't be sitting here today. But I always felt as though my good fortune came about by grinding Linda Sales Beach into the dust. Linda died in her 20s of cancer, but I always carried this burden in my heart. A couple of years ago, at a book signing in Tucson, a gentleman I didn't recognize came up to introduce himself. But when he said his name was Amos Sales, I knew at once that he was Linda's older brother. And he said, Judy, our whole family knew what you tried to do back then. Thank you. Shh. Another circle went closed. Here's a question. How many people in this room are in my database and receive notices before new books are coming out? Not a single. Oh. Thank you. What the hell is the matter with the rest of you?
We're low tech.
Okay, here's the deal. You go to my website, it's very hard to remember, jajance.com. You click on contact, and that brings up my email address. If you send me you send me your name, city, and state, and then you're in the list. I'm the only person who responds to my emails. I don't have a secretary. I do have a driver, but I don't have a secretary. Emails from my readers are important, and I don't want somebody screening through them for me. I need to see who those people are, because for some of them, they've been on the email list for 15 years now, and I know whose wife has been diagnosed with breast cancer. And somebody else reading my emails wouldn't know those important details. So once you're in the database, it's sort of like a crab pot. The only way out is to die. You can, of course, either change your email address or unsubscribe. But I send out notices to people before books are published, when the schedules go up, and there's a blog on my website, which is sort of a window on this writer's world. A lot of people, I think, are under the impression that writers live in sort of splendid isolation. And if you read my blog, you'll find out what it's like to really like to be a writer. But because my email address is out there, people write to me and they tell me what they think. And they don't hold back. There's one guy in Tucson. He evidently had issues with his mother that are as yet unresolved. His last name starts with a B, and so he's never unsubscribed. But he told me years ago that he would never read another one of my books until he knew Eleanor Lathrop Winfield was dead. And so, because he's early in the alphabet, his notice goes out early, and it's always the first response. And it always contains the same message: is she dead yet? And then there's the guy who wrote to me about the first Walker family book. He said, how come you named that one character Fat Crack? And with apologies to Mr. Brownell, Martha, I said in my email back to him, think of any plumber you've ever met. And he wrote back and said, too much information. Well, if you can't stand the answer, don't ask the question. A couple of years ago, someone wrote to me about the L.A. Reynolds books. Allie Reynolds was in her 50s when she and I got in step together, and I started writing the first Allie book, Edge of Evil. And it takes me books to find out characters' histories because I don't know everything about them when we first shake hands and I start writing. It wasn't until the third book that I discovered Allie Reynolds, like me, wouldn't have been able to go to college had she not been given a scholarship. And she is now administering the scholarship program that she once benefited from. A couple of years ago, a woman wrote to me and said, "Why do you put all that scholarship crap in the Allie Reynolds books? It doesn't have anything to do with the plot. You need to just leave it out." Well, the scholarship stuff in the Allie books has nothing to do with the plot and everything to do with me. And guess what? I write the books. So I get to put in what I want. I took my scholarship. I went to the University of Arizona. Because I wanted to be a writer, I signed up to be an English major. And then, in 1964, I tried to enroll in the creative writing class. And the professor said, "You're a girl." And I said, "So?" He said, "Girls become teachers or nurses, boys become writers," and he wouldn't let me into his class. Now, as a 20-year-old, I have to say, I was devastated because I thought all of my hopes and dreams of becoming a writer had just been snatched away. I've since come to understand that had I been allowed to enroll in a class where the professor was predisposed to fail me, I would have failed, and I most likely would have lost the passion to become a writer. So that's one good reason for not being allowed in the creative writing program. But you know, there's another good reason too. If you read my first Walker family book, Hour of the Hunter, don't be surprised when you find out that the crazed killer in that book turns out to be a former professor from the University of Arizona. So here's an important hint. If you have friends or relations who are launching off on a career of writing murder mysteries, do not make them mad. When I wasn't allowed in that class, I married a guy who was. My first husband, comma, the rat, comma. Never had anything published, even though he was allowed in the class. When we were married, he told me in 1968, "There's only going to be one writer in our family, and I'm it." He also makes a cameo appearance in Hour of the Hunter. He's dead at the beginning of the
Beautiful.
By the way, my second husband, Bill, says my first husband was so bad that it's made the last 30 years of his life perfect.
There you go.
But I did become a teacher. I taught high school English in Tucson for 2 years. And then I was a K through 12 librarian on the Tohono O'odham Reservation west of Tucson for 5 years. And during those 5 years, I told, Thursdays and Fridays were storytelling days. I told 26 stories a week in K through 6 classrooms. I was very tall. The kids on the reservation were very short. I was very white. They were very brown. And the way my wardrobe worked back then, I often ended up wearing a bright green dress on storytelling days. And so, because I came to the classes just for fun, they called me the Jolly Green Giant. But the stories I told on the reservation were stories all kids love. The little engine that could make way for ducklings, Rapunzel, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, all of those. But I also learned and told many of the legends and stories of the Tohono O'odham people, the desert people. And when I went to write Hour of the Hunter, the first of those, I took pieces of those legends and wove them into the background, and was fascinated how those old tales could mesh with the new story I was writing. And so there are now 4 of those Tohono O'odham Walker books: Hour of the Hunter, Kiss of the Bees, Day of the Dead, and Queen of the Night. As of July 13th, there will be a new Walker book called Dance of the Bones. If you have missed the Walker books, they're a remarkable piece of storytelling. While I've been writing Dance of the Bones, I've been rereading, because in Hour of the Hunter, you meet a 60-year-old woman. She was 60 in 1970. And then you meet her a few chapters later as an 8-year-old. She's Rita Pablo at 60. As an 8-year-old child, she's a girl called Dancing Quail, being raised by her grandmother, understanding woman, who was born in the 1880s. And so I had to reacquaint myself with 3 centuries of people when I was writing Dance of the Bones. But it caused me to reread those books. They're told through multiple points of view with a totally elastic timeline. And you just need to step on board, sort of like you get on board a roller coaster, and realize that those backing and forthings are going to come together to tell the story. But the legends of how Morning Star came, and where earthquakes come from, and all of those things are wonderful, wonderful folk tales. And I really feel lucky that I've been able to pass them along, not only to a generation of kids on the reservation who have never heard them told, but also to a whole country of readers. You're probably wondering, oh, okay, I want to tell you something else. Never mind. The teleprompter is off. Forget it. Last year, when I sold Dance of the Bones to my editor, I don't do outlinings. As a retired engineer, my husband would prefer I did outlines. But I met outlining in Mrs. Watkins' 6th grade geography class. I hated outlining then. Nothing that has happened to me in the intervening decades has changed my mind about outlining. Furthermore, I have a terminal fear of Roman numerals. And without Roman numerals, you can't outline. So I told my editor, okay, the next book I'm writing is going to be half Brandon Walker and half J.P. Boma. And that was fun. And so after the Remains of Innocence tour for Joanna Brady number 17 ended at the end of August, in September I started working on the next book. On the 22nd of September, I had a needle biopsy. It was benign, it was fine, but they poked an immense hole in this boob. So that night, when I went to bed and tried to lie on my left side, which is where I always lie, it hurt like hell. And so I rolled over and slept on this side, which I never sleep on. I woke up the next morning with a crick in my neck, that morphed into a 3-month battle with bursitis. You have no idea how important your shoulder is until you try to put on a bra without one. And so it took 3 months and 3 steroid shots before they finally got that. I had to sit with cushions under my arms. I couldn't sleep. And it turns out I couldn't write either, because that kind of chronic pain just zaps all creative energy right out of your soul. Finally, the last steroid shot worked, and I started working on this book. And that's when I learned something about J.P. Beaumont that I hadn't known in 3 decades of writing about him. He does not play well with others. He kept walking into this book and taking over. He wanted to be front and center all the time. Well, this was supposed to be an Arizona book. And I couldn't get J.P. Beaumont under control, and so I finally had to remove that part of the story. Even though the book was already late, I took 75 pages out, and turned that into a novella. It's called Stand Down. It will be out in ebook format in May, and it will be out in dead tree format, aka paper, in June. I call my dead tree readers DTRs. I suspect there are some DTRs in this room. So I was able to get Beaumont to sort of straighten up and fly right then. But I still couldn't get the book to come together. There's a point in writing each book where the story starts to tell itself, and where the characters are doing things without me having to tell them what to do. Bill suggested that perhaps, in order to get this book back on track, we should attempt a geographical cure. So we went to Tucson, to our house in Tucson, and we arrived at a house that had been closed up for 6 months. There were no groceries in the house. So the next morning, we went to breakfast at a little neighborhood diner. As we were leaving, we had Bella with us, and we were walking across the parking lot with a couple, and by the look of them, I assumed they were from the reservation. But they were talking about how cute the dog was, and I agreed, she is cute. So when we got to the cars, I put Bella in, and then I turned back to the couple, and I said, "Are you from the reservation?" And the man said, "Yes." And I said, "I was the librarian out there for a number of years." And this little flash of recognition went across his face. And he said to me in this distinctly Tohono O'odham way of speaking, where there's a full stop between almost every word. He said, "Are you the lady who writes all those books?" To have that kind of interaction with an Anglo in a public place, a stranger in a public place, is astonishing. The desert people are very reticent and shy. And I felt as though he had just given me a parking lot blessing. And I went back home, and Dance of the Bones started to sing to me. And that book will be out on the 13th of July. Now I suppose you're saying, okay, is she ever going to talk about the new book? Well, if you don't like the way I'm doing the talk, it's okay, get your money back for whatever. Okay, I'll talk about the new book. It's about time. Growing up in Bisbee in the 50s, there was a huge political brouhaha that took over the whole state. Arizona is not nearly as big as California, but it's a big state. And Bisbee is in the lower southeast corner, and Kingman, the county seat of Mojave County, is in the upper left-hand corner. And Mojave County is very big. There's one big problem. The Grand Canyon is in the middle of it. Above the Grand Canyon is this area of land that's called the Arizona Strip. So it's in Mojave County, but in order for a deputy to get there from the Sheriff's Department in Kingman, it's either a 4-hour 3-state trip or a 6-hour 1-state trip, because you have to drive around the whole Grand Canyon. And that remoteness and that lack of police presence, law enforcement presence, has given rise to any number of cults who have settled in that spot. Many of them polygamous cults. I think it was about 1952, I can't remember for sure, but the then governor of Arizona, Governor Pyle, looked up the Arizona Strip and he said, you know, polygamy is against the law. Maybe we should do something about this. So he gathered up the Arizona Highway Patrol and the Arizona National Guard, and they went up to a place called Short Creek to straighten those people out. Except somebody told the people of Short Creek they were coming. So by the time the authorities arrived in town, the whole town was gathered in the church singing hymns. Close to 500 people were taken into custody and arrested that day. Almost half of those were minor children, many of whom were never returned to their biological families. And that caused such a political furor that the next time there was an election, Governor Pyle lost his bid for re-election. And since then, every governor has said, you know, we'll just let those people in the Arizona Strip do whatever they want. They're not really bothering anybody. But the truth is, they are bothering people, because it's from that community that we ended up with that polygamist with the underage wives, Warren Jeffs. And so that's always been part of my consciousness. It was the subject of breakfast conversations at our home on Yuma Trail. And so I was actually, you know, younger people don't believe this. They think that there weren't any real women who burned bras in the early 70s. But I did. I did burn a bra. It was a nursing bra. I tossed it on the barbecue grill after I cooked dinner. So that made it sort of a mixed message. But I've sort of lost faith with the current crop of feminists, because they seem to have forgotten, they've missed the memo, that there are millions of women and girls on this planet who are not allowed to go to school, who are not allowed to learn to read, who are not allowed to drive automobiles, and I don't think we should turn our backs on those disenfranchised women. And so I created a cult called the Family on the Arizona Strip. They live in the encampment. And you can bet the girls in the family are less than second-class citizens. If you're in a situation like that, supposing you are someone who's being physically or sexually abused, where do you go for help? If all the representatives of law enforcement are also part of the cult, there's no aid for you. In Cold Betrayal, you'll meet a 16-year-old girl who, at the older age of 16, is having her first child. And when she discovers that her baby is a girl, and knowing what the future holds for girls in the family, Enid decides to run away. She gets as far as the trading post in Colorado City. She goes into the restroom. She goes into one of the stalls, and she sets about cutting off her ankle-length skirt so that when she's out on the street, she won't look so obviously out of place. When I was writing that scene, I remembered one of the stories I used to tell on the reservation. And I'm going to tell it to you now. Once upon a time, there was a man and woman who had so many children they couldn't afford to feed them all. So one day the father took the 3 eldest out into the forest and left them there. Now the youngest of these was a girl named Molly Whuppie, and she was very clever. When it started to grow dark, the 2 older girls were frightened and crying, but Molly Whuppie said, "Look, there's a light over there. It must be a house. Let's go there and see if whoever lives there will give us something to eat and a place to spend the night." So they went to the door. Molly Whuppie knocked on the door. A woman answered, and Molly Whuppie explained their predicament. "Oh no," the woman said, "my man's a giant. If he comes home and finds you here, he'll eat you for dinner, sure." But Molly Whuppie begged and pleaded, and at last the woman let them in. Now it happened that the giant and his wife had 3 daughters of their own, and soon all 6 girls were eating dinner around a table. The giant came home. When the giant's wife explained what was happening, he went straight to his treasure chest, took out 3 gold necklaces, and put those around the necks of his own 3 daughters. Then he wove 3 straw necklaces and put those around the necks of Molly Whuppie and her sisters. Then he told all 6 girls to sleep in the same bed. When they went to bed, the other girls fell fast asleep, but Molly Whuppie was careful to stay awake. And as soon as the other girls were sleeping, she exchanged the straw necklaces she and her sisters were wearing for the gold necklaces the giant's daughters were wearing. Then she got back into bed. The giant came in. He felt around the girls' necks until he found the 3 straw necklaces, and in the dark he strangled his own 3 daughters. While that was happening, Molly Whuppie woke up her sisters. They ran out of the house. They ran through the night, and the next morning found them in a different country. When the king of that country heard what had happened, he called Molly Whuppie and her sisters before him. "Aye, and a clever girl you are too, Molly Whuppie," said the king. "But oh, you'd be so much more clever if you go back to the giant's house and bring me the bag of gold he keeps under his pillow. Do this, and I'll give my eldest son to marry your eldest sister." So Molly Whuppie went back to the giant's house, crept in, hid under the bed. The giant came home, ate his dinner, and soon was snoring fast asleep. When that happened, Molly Whuppie very quietly crept out from under the bed, and very carefully she began to pull the bag of gold out from under the giant's pillow. But just as she got it out, the gold gave a clang, he jumped up, he ran, she ran, he ran, she ran, until they came to the bridge of 1 hair, and she got over, but he couldn't. "Woe betide you, Molly Whuppie, if ever you come this way again," cried the giant. "Twice more, Carl," quoth she, "will I come again to Spain." So Molly Whuppie took the giant's gold back to the king, and the king was pleased to give his eldest son to marry her eldest sister. "Aye, and a clever girl you are too, Molly Whuppie," says the king. "But oh, you'd be so much more clever if you go back and bring me the sword the giant keeps on the wall over his bed. Do this, and I'll give my second son to marry your second sister." So Molly Whuppie went back to the giant's house, crept in, hid under the bed. The giant came home, ate his dinner, and soon was snoring fast asleep. When that happened, Molly Whuppie very quietly crept out from under the bed, and very carefully she lifted the sword down from the wall. But just as she got it down, the sword gave a clang, and he ran, she ran, he ran, she ran, until they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over, but he couldn't. Woe betide you, Molly Whuppie, if ever you come this way again. Once more, Carl, quoth she, will I come again to Spain. So Molly Whuppie took the giant's sword back to the king, and the king was pleased to give his second son to marry her second sister. Aye, and a clever girl you are too, Molly Whuppie, says the king. But oh, you'd be so much more clever if you go back and bring me the ring the giant wears on his finger. Do this, and I'll give my youngest son to marry you. So Molly Whuppie went back to the giant's house, crept in, hid under the bed. The giant came home, ate his dinner, and soon was snoring fast asleep. When that happened, Molly Whuppie very quietly crept out from under the bed, and very carefully she began to pull the giant's ring off his finger. But just as she got it off, he grabbed her by the arm and he said, "Now I got you, Molly Whuppie. Now if I was you and you was me, and I'd done as much evil to you as you have done to me, what would you do to me, Molly Whuppie?" And Molly Whuppie looked that giant right in the eye and she said, "If I was you and you was me, and you'd done as much evil to me as I have done to you, I'd throw you in a bag, along with the dog aside that, along with the cat aside that, along with the scissors and a needle and thread. I'd hang the bag up on the hook over there. I'd go out into the woods, find myself the biggest stick I could find, and I'd come back and beat you to death." What a good idea, Molly Whuppie, said the giant. "That's just what I'm going to do." So the giant threw Molly Whuppie in a bag, along with the dog aside her, along with the cat aside that, along with the scissors and a needle and thread. He hung the bag up on the hook. Then he went out into the forest to find a stick. As soon as the giant left, Molly Whuppie sings out in a loud, clear voice, "Oh, if you could see what I see." "What do you see, Molly Whuppie?" says the giant's wife. Molly Whuppie just sings out again, "Oh, if you could see what I see." "Let me see what you see, Molly Whuppie," said the giant's wife. "All right, but first you'll have to get into the bag." So Molly Whuppie cut her way out of the bag with the scissors. She helped the giant's wife in, and then she sewed it back up with the needle and thread. "I can't see anything, Molly Whuppie," says the giant's wife. "Let me out." But just then the giant came home, and he began to beat the bag. "It's me, man, it's me," cried the giant's wife. But the dog barked, and the cat yelled, and the giant couldn't recognize his own wife's voice. Just then, he spotted Molly Whuppie hiding behind the door. He ran, she ran, he ran, she ran, until they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over, but he couldn't. "Woe betide you, Molly Whuppie, if ever you come this way again." "Never no more, Carl," quoth she, "will I come again to Spain." So Molly Whuppie took the giant's ring back to the king, and the king was pleased to give his youngest son to marry her, and the two of them lived happily ever after. Now when you read Cold Betrayal, and you get to the scene in the restroom in the Trading Post, you're going to know why that story came into my head as I was writing it. And if you look at the very front of the book, where you might expect to find a dedication, you'll find the words, "Threw her in the bag, along with the dog aside her, along with the cat aside her." And you know what? Only people who have been to events like this are going to know why those words are there. Everybody else is just going to think I've lost my marbles. marrying my first husband with the idea of living happily ever after was a totally fruitcake idea. From the standpoint of being a mystery writer, the guy was a gold mine. How else could I have found myself on a hot summer evening in Hammond, Indiana, hiding behind the trunk of an elm tree because a gunfight had just broken out in his favorite dive bar? You know, there's nothing like having some real world experience to use to write these books. My husband was a bit of a pill. He did tell me in 1968 there's only going to be one writer in our family, and I'm it. At the time, we were living near a little community called 3 Points. 30 miles from town in either direction, 2 miles off the highway, 7 miles to the nearest neighbor and or telephone in those pre-cell phone days. By 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night, he would be passed out cold in his recliner. And on those long, lonely, solitary evenings, I entertained myself by writing poetry. I thought I was being true to my art. I knew I wasn't being true to him because whenever I finished writing a poem, I always hid it away in the strong box so he wouldn't see it. I knew the strong place was a place he would never go. Between 1972, when my daughter was born, and 1980, he was hospitalized 9 times for chronic alcoholism. In the spring of 1980, he showed up at my 6-year-old son's t-ball game so drunk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that when the game was over, he crawled on his hands and knees from the bleachers back to the car. And it was during that walk with my children, their friends, and their friends' parents that I realized if 18 years of loving him hadn't fixed him, I needed to do something to save my children and save myself. So I got a divorce. And as soon as I got a divorce, he started showing up on my doorstep every Saturday morning saying, you know, you said in sickness and in health, this is sickness, take me back. I didn't divorce him because I no longer loved him. I divorced him because I had to save myself. And so I did the only thing I could figure out to do, an adventure in moving. The kids and I, with all our worldly possessions loaded into a U-Haul trailer, dragged behind the 78 Cutlass Supreme Brome that he said I never should have bought and would never be able to pay for. I'm happy to tell you we drove here today in our Mercedes S550. I do hold grudges. In May of 1982, he was working construction in Phoenix and broke his wrist. It was an on-the-job injury, so it was covered by workman's comp. So he had money coming in. He was living rent-free in a house his mother owned in Tempe. And so he spent his time drinking all day, every day. In November of that year, his mother decided to come see him in Tempe for Thanksgiving. He decided that he would sober up for his mother's visit. He did so with no medical intervention. Thanksgiving night, he was found lying in a street. At first, people thought he had been the victim of a hit and run. In fact, he had gone into DTs and was hospitalized with no kidney or liver function, and died a few minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve. In 1983, in January, then it was time to get out all of those documents that you have to present when someone dies: birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, all of that stuff. And in the strong box, I found all of those pieces of poetry jotted down on yellow notebook paper. When I read through them, it was like seeing my life in instant replay. I hadn't been being true to my art. I had been being a writer and using words to grapple with the central issues of my life. Somebody saw the poetry and they said, it needs to be a book. And now it is a book. After the Fire is my autobiography in poetry and prose. They're little essays that tell you what was going on in my life when each of these poems were written. Now, when I'm doing a signing and I suggest to someone, well, would you like to try the poetry? Some of them leap back like I'm a striking rattlesnake. I understand that these are folks who already suffered from a fear of public speaking when they were required to stand up in sophomore high school English and recite the Ode to a Grecian Urn. So they suffer from what I call a poetry-induced case of post-traumatic stress disorder. But these poems are not the Ode to a Grecian Urn. They're very straightforward. They tell a story that is far too common in too many lives. I know why people don't leave troubled relationships. I know why people don't leave abusive relationships. Because the devil you know isn't as scary as the devil you don't know. I went to Seattle. I started living my dream, writing books. In 1985, I was invited to do a poetry reading of After the Fire at a widowed retreat. And there, I met a man whose first wife, Lynn, died of breast cancer a few minutes before New Year's Eve, on 1984-85. Bill and I met on the 21st of June. We struck up a conversation on that coincidence of shared tough times. We met on the 21st of June. We got married on the 21st of December. We were in love. Our adolescent children were not in love, so that was complicated. But I'd like to close by reciting the title poem from After the Fire. It goes like this. I have touched the fire. It burned me, but I knew I lived. It seared me, but it made me whole. He called me. I went gladly, though I saw the rocks, fell laughing through the singeing air. I have known the fire. I'll live with nothing rather than with less. The flame is out. There's nothing left but ash. Thank you very much.